Jeff Sher, thank you very much for agreeing to being interviewed for this project. You are and were a leading defamation specialist at the bar, but that only really touches on a tiny part of your whole career as a barrister. Let's just start with your earliest years. You were born in 1936. Tell us a little bit about your earliest years and what schools you went to.
Well, I started off because my mother was living in St Kilda at St Kilda Park State School, where Zelman Cowan also went to school, but not at the same time. But though my parents were separated, my father realised, I think, that a good education was important, so he was prepared to pay for me to go to a good school, and he paid for me to go to Haileybury, which at that stage was a school of about, when I started in 1944, a little more than 200 students. I think it's now got over 3,000. So I spent my boyhood years as a boarder at Haileybury until my last 2 years at school when I was a day boy. And I matriculated, as you did then, at the age of 16, and went to Melbourne University to do law.
What sort of student were you, do you think?
Well, not being immodest, I was a pretty good student. I did very well in my final year, and that's how I got into university. I had to achieve a certain level of success in my exams and managed to do that, so I started law at the age of 16.
So you knew you were going to be a lawyer, even
Well,
at that early age?
I had this romantic notion, I think probably fostered by shows like Perry Mason, but it's a lot different.
Were there other figures while you were growing up who perhaps also influenced you to do law, or were there lawyers in your family even?
No lawyers in the family, nothing really. It's just that I had this romantic notion about being an advocate and set out to become one. But I was too young really to go straight to the bar, so I did articles with the Commonwealth Crown Solicitors in Melbourne for and another year, got admitted at the age of 21, and then went to work for a former politician, John Don, who'd set up practice after he left Parliament in Elsternwick, and I worked for John for a couple of years, doing a lot of magistrates' court work, so I got practice at client's expense, and then I went to the bar.
The magistrates' court in those days was a bit of a rough and tumble atmosphere, and I imagine a very good apprenticeship for a young lawyer.
Well, it was worse than that in a sense, because a lot of the cases were heard by JPs who had absolutely no legal training at all. So you were sort of like appearing before a jury even before you appeared before a jury. But some of the justice handed out was pretty rough, yes.
Do you think it was a good thing they did away with the JP system?
Absolutely essential in my view. I think there was some terrible justice administered at the hands of untrained JPs. I could give some examples, but I don't think I will.
Did you see anything specifically corrupt or in any way untoward, or perhaps...
No, I think...
Or did you just feel a sort of a general disgust at perhaps the way things were meted out? I'm talking about your impressions at that time.
Well, magistrates weren't a heck of a lot better, in fact, in many cases. There were some good ones, but there were a lot of bad ones, and that's probably because they didn't have sufficient legal training or the objectivity that you now get from trained lawyers who are made magistrates. I mean, the improvement in the standards in the lower courts has been dramatic.
Was John Donne an important early figure for you while you were starting out in law?
Sure. John, very nice man for a start, very knowledgeable, and even though I was young and didn't know a great deal, he sort of gave me a lot of important work to do, and sort of learnt on the job.
Did you have any contemporaries from that time who you still know well today, well acquainted with today, who went with you to the bar, perhaps?
Well, one guy springs to mind, Graham Emanuel, was passed away about 10, 15 years ago. I think a number of my contemporaries have passed on. Thinking in terms of those who went to the bar, I was at school with John Barnard, who was a few years older than me. John went to the bar and took silk, and we ended up practising in much the same area, which was personal injuries. But I hadn't seen John for years. He retired some years ago.
Your mother and father too, I imagine, were very pleased that you went into law?
I think so. It's funny, really. I had a pretty good scholastic career, reasonably good academic career at university, and quite a lot of success at the bar, but I never really heard much from my father at all. And I didn't really get on terribly well with my mother, so I sort of did it on my own.
A lone wolf.
Well, I've been described in a number of ways, and that's probably one of them.